Hello, welcome back to the Determined Student channel. So for my second video, what I wanted to address is finances. And the reason why I think they're really important is because it does drive not only my life, but like almost everyone's life here on earth. One of the things I wanted to improve personally is finances because right now, while I'm doing okay, I could do better. So I wanted to address that and to try to not only help myself, but help others in this regard as well. I wanted to just basically touch up on that. If you're not already aware, many Americans live paycheck to paycheck. And as sad as it sounds, it's how we are collectively. And the reason for that is because we tend to rely on just getting paid just minimum wage or just getting paid a semi-decent living wage. But we have so many expenses that incur on a monthly basis that we have to be constantly paying bills, and we also have to constantly worry about taking care of other expenses that may come. And since we're not getting paid enough to cover those expenses, we end up stuck in what's called the rat race. Essentially what the rat race is that you constantly just stuck paycheck to paycheck, and that your income barely exceeds your expenses to the point that you're just gonna constantly have to work until you retire. And even past retirement, it's not even a guarantee that you'll be able to make it financially, because we don't know if Social Security is still going to be around, and we don't. And it's kind of sad and scary that we have to rely on something like that. People with really high paying jobs that they get paid six figures, let's say over $100,000 annually, they are, I believe it was stated that 1 in 10 of those people are still stuck in the rat race themselves, in the sense that they just live paycheck by paycheck, and then after spending all that money, they don't really have much that they kept for themselves. So in that unique situation, what tends to happen is that as their income increases, their expenses also increases. So they see themselves with a lot of money, so that means they reward themselves, quote unquote, with buying nice luxuries or buying nice cars, or buying a nice house in a good neighborhood, which they can afford at the time, and still can, of course. But what ends up happening, they just live on a paycheck, and whatever they get income wise, that's what they spend on, and they don't have really much else to save, or if they do, it's very little. It's not just a unique case to just you and me, but sadly most Americans actually are conditioned to be this way, because that's the way that our economy works, is through spending, excessive spending. We spend on things that we don't necessarily need. Some things that we do need, of course, food, clothes, a roof over your head, and so on and so forth. But then it gets to the point that when we do have any money left over ever since we've been children ourselves, from a young age, all of us, we've been indoctrinated to think about spending, buying this, buying more toys than we need, or buying more jewelry than we need, or more clothing than we need, or buying expensive cars, or buying a house that's probably a little above our means, but because we have the ability to finance it, we tell ourselves that it's okay, and we go through with it. But that's how we actually get stuck in this predicament, is because we were taught that this is how it is to live in America, or to live in a first world country, that we should put ourselves into debt, and that through our work we'll be able to pay it off. Which, in practice, I guess it could be okay, but we're not taking into account of that what happens if you get laid off. What happens if something unexpected happens, that you can't work anymore, you get into a Lord forbid, into an accident, and now you can't work anymore. So how are you going to pay off your expenses and your liabilities? The thing is that this country doesn't really care. What they ultimately just care is to try to stimulate the economy to the best as possible, and by doing so, it's just spending, and more spending. So ever since we were young kids, we would always see commercials about toys or dolls or video games. They're always constantly getting to us and programming us, hey, if you buy this, you'll be happy. If you buy that, you'll be the cool kid at school. If you get this, if you can get your parents to get you that, then that's their parents' way of saying they love you. That's how they've been doing this, and it's been a practice for as long as advertising's been a thing. Predominantly in America, we've been conditioned to be that way. That's something that we all need to address. And again, I am not the exception to this. I have fallen victim to this as well, thinking that if I buy things, it will make my life more fulfilling and make me feel better and happier, which, you know, momentarily it has, but long term it hasn't made me feel more fulfilled or have like a deeper sense of like inner meaning or like happiness. It's very short-lived. So instead, what I wanted to address and what I'm going to practice doing personally is that I want to look into ways to try to, like, as opposed to like spending all the time, is to instead investing. I want to get out of the rat race. I'm sure I'm not the only one. Most of us aren't even aware that we're even on a race. That was me a while ago too. A few years ago, I thought that, you know, this is how life is. And if I wanted to get rich, I'd have to, like, you know, maybe win a big at the lottery, get a big inheritance from a relative one day, or come up with like a really brilliant idea. But those were the only options I had in my mind. It was either you do that or you build a business, and that was it. But I didn't know how to start, and in many ways I still don't know. But again, the idea is that I'm going to be showing through example everything that I've done right and everything that I've done wrong, and try to like be an example for myself and for everyone else, so that through all the mistakes that I'm going to make, I will hopefully get better and learn from them. But my goal is to try to get out of this race. For the past few months, I've actually looked into educating myself, reading financial books. Some examples that I can list off is one is called Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. That series was essentially teaches like a lot of practical advice, as well as like core examples as to how you can actually get out, not only out of the rat race, but actually get rich. So that's another thing I want to look into, is that my main objective is just to get out of the rat race. But if I can get rich on top of it, that's just an added bonus for me anyway. I know many other people would like to be rich. For me, I'm open to the idea, but I just want to get out of the race, so that way I can just retire and, you know, while I'm still young, and do whatever I like to do. I will explain more into detail the difference between getting out of the race and being rich. Like I stated, you know, I'm also stuck in this race along with everyone else, sadly. You know, unless you're like, even like people who are rich can technically still be in the rat race, because if you spend just as much as you earn, that's technically putting you in the race as well. So what I wanted to cover in this video would be like a brief overview summary of all. I kind of wrote down like a little bit of a script of 17 steps that I thought was like crucially important to not only firstly get out of debt, secondly to try to start investing, and then slowly but surely over time get rich. One thing that I do want to preface before I go through the steps is that this is not going to be a get rich quick scheme. I am a fervent believer that while it is possible to get rich quickly, in order to do so, you have to firstly educate yourself, and you have to be, in some sense, lucky. Ultimately, if you want to get rich, it's not going to be a quick process. It's going to take a long time to do this, and it's going to require a lot of discipline and the ability to be brave, because this is going to require a lot of bravery on your end, because investing can be pretty daunting, especially how if you pay attention to like how the market's fluctuating all the time. Some people will start and then back out just because of how volatile it can sometimes get. But if you pay attention to what I can offer here through these videos, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to go into like a brief summary of all 17 steps, but at the same time, I'm going to go into more detail into each step on a separate video. So there'll be 17 separate videos that will discuss in more detail the steps that would be necessary to get to where we all want to get to. Just keep in mind is that I am not a financial advisor. I don't really have a degree in anything. I'm actually a college dropout student, so I, just take this as advice and just understand that I don't really have any professional credentials. So I am not a financial advisor. I am not, nor am I an expert keep in mind that I'm just learning just as much as you're going to. So I'm just going to like apply what I know and try to act. So just use this video for entertainment and educational purposes only. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and just list some of the steps right here. Okay. Okay, so the very first thing that we want to do above all else is to try to understand a little bit of accounting terms. Specifically, what I want to talk about on the first step is to understand what an asset and a liability is. People who work with finances or work with accounting, I'm sure most of you know what that is. I've heard the words thrown around quite a few times, but I never actually looked deep into understanding what that meant. Through Rich Dad Poor Dad, it actually addresses it very, very well. Essentially, what the difference between an asset and a liability is that an asset just simply means that any money that you make that's going into your bank account or into your wallet, and a liability is anything that's going to be leaving out of your bank account or money leaving your pocket. But I'll go into more detail about that again. But for now, it's just to give you a somewhat of an understanding of what that is. The second step that I want to look into is to try to understand how to read a financial statement and a balance sheet. In this case, what I'm going to look into is that we should try to look into our personal financial statements and balance sheets. The reason why this is so important is going to show us how we're doing financially. So it's kind of like a report card or like a diagnostics from the hospital of how we're doing. If we can understand how to read this, we'll be able to know where we stand and how we're doing. In order for us to actually get better, we need to know how we're doing first and how to treat whatever is causing an ailment. So in this case, it'd be a financial ailment. The third step is that after we understand how to read a financial statement, the next thing we want to do is to make our own. I'll go into more detail as to how we can do that in the next video, but just understand that making your own financial statement is really important, because again, this is how we're going to know how we're doing financially and how we can address and fix your own financial life. If we make our own statements, it will show how we're doing, whether if we're making positive income or if it's negative or if we're not making any. So all that's going to be really important. The fourth step is to try to find out what's causing our financial statement to be negative or any expenses that might be a little excessive. So again, this financial statement will be important to help guide us, and it's going to show all of our expenses. Since we can see them through the numbers, we can better understand what's causing our expenses to be so high. So on step number 5, what I will go over is talking about the importance of what an actual asset is. Now you'll be wondering, why am I saying a real asset or an actual asset? Like, wouldn't an asset just be an asset? Well, and in many cases you would think so, and more often than not it is, but there are certain times that people around you or commercials or certain financial advisors might say that something is an asset, but in reality is a liability. One very particular example, again through Robert Kiyosaki's book Rich Dad Poor Dad, he mentions about owning a home, is that we are constantly told that our home is our greatest asset. Don't get me wrong when I say this, it is actually so much better to own a house through a mortgage than it is to rent, because at least you're paying towards your home and you're not like putting money in someone else's pocket long term. In the sense you are, because you're paying the bank, but once you pay it off, that property will be yours. But what I mean is that the reason why it's a liability is that being a homeowner requires like upkeep, it requires maintenance, it requires, other expenses that you normally wouldn't consider or even think about it the first time you buy the home. And you also need to pay property tax. Even if you own the deed to the home, you still have to pay a property tax to the state. So it's money being poured out all the time under your expenses. So that's why it counts as a liability, because it's taking money out of your pocket. What I will go into more detail in step 5 is what some examples of what real assets are. Things that you can invest in would be like the stock market. You can invest in yourself, like through royalties. So if you have like a skill that you can like market yourself out, if you write music or write a book, you can do that via royalties. You can invest in like in index funds. You can invest like in bonds, notes. I can list so much more, but that will just give you an idea as to what actual assets are. Step number 6 is to learn the importance of what a good debt and bad debt is. I'm just going to briefly touch the difference. When people hear about debt, that they always say, oh, it's always bad, that you should never go into debt. Well, unless you don't know what you're doing, if you're unsure of what you're doing with the debt, then that's actually solid advice. You should very strongly not go into debt, because if you don't know what you're doing, you're definitely going to hurt yourself financially. So, but the thing is that what I want to cover is just briefly in that step is that there is a difference between good debt and bad debt. So one example could be of good debt is that if I decided to make a down payment of a house for $10,000 and I got myself into a mortgage of $100,000, if I immediately get a tenant and rent out the property to that tenant and they pay me like a positive amount, again like $1,300, I would be generating $300 a month in passive income. The reason for passive is because I really didn't have to do a whole lot. If you wanted to be truly passive, you'd have to hire a property manager and a handyman to take care of your home in case something goes wrong and something needs fixing. The property manager will take care of it, so that makes it truly passive at that point. But instead of getting that $300, you would get like $100. But that's $100 of passive income. But the thing is that in order for me to get that house, I had to put myself to a mortgage, which is debt. But this particular debt is good debt because I'm making $100 a month. So that's just one example. I'll go into more details as to many more examples as to how you can get good debt, or you can actually turn a bad debt into a good one. I can talk about some examples as to how to do that as well. So on step number 7, what I want to talk about is that there is a rule. This rule is referring to percentages. It is the 10%, 20%, and 70% rule. So I'll briefly touch up on what I mean by this. 10% is essentially meaning that you pay yourself first. What I mean by paying yourself first is that before you even pay off any expenses or any debt, and in this case, when it's payday and you come home with your paycheck, the very first thing you should do is actually put that 10% towards investing. And you invest in real assets. So the very first thing you want to do is you pay yourself first. The reason why it's so important is that if you don't do so, you're going to end up paying off your debt. You're going to spend the rest of the money on yourself. When I say on yourself, I mean like buying things, but you're not investing in yourself because you're not keeping the money because you spent it all on food, on video games, or anything else. But you spent it all and you don't have nothing else in your bank account, so you don't really have anything else. You haven't really paid yourself in that sense. So that's what they mean by paying yourself, is that it's really important that we do that. The next thing that you should do is 20% is to pay off your debt. And I don't mean just paying the minimum requirement for that debt. You have to pay the minimum first, and then with that 20% that's remaining, you want to pay it towards paying off the principal of that debt. So what I mean is that if your minimum credit card is $5 a month, you're not going to just pay the $5, because if you do that, you're never going to get out of debt. The amount's still going to be there, so what you need to do is chip away at it. You have to pay off the minimum first, and then you invest 20% paying off that debt, because our goal is to pay off all bad debts as soon as we can. So that way we can get towards a more healthier financial future. The 70% on that rule is that you just take care of all of their expenses. Whatever your expenses are, food, housing, mortgage, and on, so on and so forth, you just pay it off. On step number 8, what I'm going to address in that step is to try to live more frugally. Now, the reason why I would say that this is so important, and contrary to popular belief, if you actually pay attention to most rich people, they're not very quick to spend their money. What they actually tend to do is that they live very frugally. The ones who actually tend to spend the most are the ones who are trying to prove that they're rich, but in reality they're not, because they feel very insecure about themselves. So one example could be is that if you earn your first $100,000, what a person might do is buy a really expensive car to try to show off to everyone else, or remodel their kitchen and try to prove to people that, saying, hey, look, I'm actually pretty rich. Don't you see all the cool stuff I have? And to the people who don't understand their financial situation, they'll actually look at that and say, oh, this person's actually rich. Look what they have. I don't have that, and they do. But what ends up happening, more often than not always the case, but people who tend to do that put themselves into like financial risk. That's something that you're gonna have to keep in mind. The actual rich don't actually buy expensive luxuries. What they tend to do is that they live very frugally. Occasionally they'll spend on something, but they have really intelligent methods as to how they manage to pay for those luxuries, because they're pretty smart about how they do it. They don't just spend out of the money that they earn. They find other avenues to pay that off. It's best to try to reduce your expenses as much as you can, because that will free up more money to allow you to invest even more. You want to try to live more frugally, so that way you can, like, whatever money you have left over, ideally you want to reinvest it. On step number 9, what I want to talk about is that after you free up some money, is that it's very important that you try to save up like anywhere from 3 months to 6 months worth of your expenses. Again, just look at your financial statement as to what your expenses are. And you want to save up at least 3 months, ideally 6 months worth of those expenses in case something happens. Because if you ever get laid off, or if you are going through hardship, or you have a very expensive repair, or your car breaks down, it's important to have that, so that way you don't just immediately go to your investments and cash it out to pay off those expenses, those unforeseen expenses. So it's best to try to save some money for that reason. So whatever you have left over, just please do your best to try to like save up what you can, because we can't predict the future and we are not going to know what's going to happen. So please, keep aware of that. On step number 10, we want to make sure to like update our financial statement monthly, so that way we know how it's reflected and how healthy we're doing financially, just so that we have an idea of what's going on. But yeah, definitely update that financial statement, so that way we know how we're doing. On step number 11 is to try to understand the difference between portfolio income, ordinary income, and passive income. There is a very strong difference between all three of them. Is the amount of money you earn, because that is a key factor in it, but it's actually taxes. Ordinary income, just to summarize, is essentially income that's being taxed when you work a 9 to 5, or when you anything that requires your time and your labor and you get paid as a result. That's considered ordinary income. This is where all of our taxes gets collected the most, is actually through that form of income. The other two are not really taxed as heavily. Portfolio income and passive income, taxes significantly less, but just understand it is important to know the difference, and to also understand that there are legal ways to try to like reduce or even not even pay taxes in some instances. The rich actually have found many loopholes through attorneys, because they're rich and they're pretty powerful. Whenever a law gets passed, they just find a way to make it so that the middle class or the poor pays it instead. So they'll find legal loopholes or workarounds. And we can harness that power too. So it's not just for the rich. So on step number 12, I mentioned about something that's called the rat race. So what the rat race essentially means is that we constantly spend just as much as we earn, and we don't become any richer as a result. We usually end up with like nothing to show for it. In order for us to get out, what we actually need to do is spend, but we need to spend properly. Instead of spending on liabilities, we actually want to spend and invest in assets that will generate passive income. Now, the reason why passive income is important is that it allows us to cover for our expenses even if we don't work. So I'll go into more detail what passive income is, but just to give you a brief idea, it just essentially means that you make money in your sleep, or you make money when you're working, and whatever you invested in is also making money. So one example of that is that if you invest in dividends, that's considered passive income, because you didn't really have to do anything and it was earned during your sleep. So in order to get out of this rat race, is that we want to make enough passive income to meet and exceed our monthly expenses. So if we can keep our expenses low, frugally, then we'll be able to get out of this race sooner. And in doing so will allow us to get into the fast track. So we don't have to worry about our monthly expenses anymore. Our rent is taken care of, our mortgage is being paid off, groceries are being paid off, all passively. Then we can actually focus on investing even more aggressively. because we don't have to worry anymore. If something happens, you'll be fine. You have a safety net now. That's my personal goal, is just to get to this point, so that if something happens, I don't have to worry. I'll be fine. Step number 13, after you paid off your debts, 20%, I would strongly encourage that you invest 10% towards a charity of that 20%, and then you use the other 20% towards investing. So instead of investing 10%, you'll be investing 20%. I am a very strong believer that whenever you invest in something towards the betterment of others, that it will be paid towards you as a result. There's been a lot of financial books and a lot of investors that have strongly recommended in doing the same. So if they're all saying this, it's probably for a very good reason. I strongly believe that it's really important to look into that. You don't have to necessarily do it through money, but I would recommend, instead of investing that 10%, then it should be through volunteering and doing anything that betters the community. I'll go into more detail as to why, but just know that it's important. Step number 14, one thing that you want to keep in mind is that so long as you're an employee, you're never going to be rich. You might do well, and even if you take care of your finances, you might get to the point where you can retire and be okay. But if you actually want to be like the rich and make a lot of money, short-term and long-term, this job is not going to get you there. Short-term, it actually will, if you continue to invest in yourself, or you continue to invest in businesses, if you buy businesses, or if you build a business, or if you invest passively. That's how you're actually going to get there. So just keep in mind that it's important to continue to keep working for now, but just understand that it's a short-term solution, but it's not going to be your answer long-term. You should use it as a means to continue investing, so that way eventually your investments will outperform the amount of money you make. Even if you make 6 figures, if you invest it wisely, you'll be making 7 figures a year. If you learn how to invest it, it will outperform your current job, no matter what that may be. But you can still do both. You can you can mind your business while still being an employee. If you like what you're doing and you enjoy your job, then I'm not saying to quit. Definitely keep your job. Just understand, if you want to be rich, that's not how you're going to get there. You're just making your boss richer. Okay, so on step number 15, what I want to talk about is investing. We talked about assets, but there are instances of where we can actually invest for the betterment of our own success, is to invest in tools or to invest in other means that will actually get us to make more money in the future. So if you were to buy a really nice computer today, it's going to be a major expense. Over time, if your goal is to be a programmer and you buy this nice computer, what's going to end up happening is that you will make a whole lot more money if you improve on your skills, you freelance, or you work for a major company. Or better yet, if you build your own software company and develop your own software, and you'll be living off of the royalties, that what was once an expense or a liability became a major asset later on. So there are certain instances where you should actually look into whatever you want to do is to invest in yourself with good tools, so that way you can get to where you want to get to. On step number 16, it's really important to invest in your education. So similar to step 15, is that in this case, you'll be investing mentally. The reason why it's so important to do so is to try to educate yourself on whatever you want to do. So if you want to build a business, learn how to build a business. If you're going to learn to invest in stocks, learn how to invest in stocks. If you're going to open your own restaurant, learn the ins and outs of it and how to make good food. So learn how to be a good chef. If you invest in your own education, that's going to be your trump card ultimately, because if, say for example, if you build a business and it fails, not only would you learn from the mistakes of that business and you'll get better, so you're gaining knowledge already, but because you have that knowledge, you can just rebuild it right back up and you'll be able to do it faster because you know what you're doing this time. Definitely look into investing in yourself, because when you do so, the amount of money you'll make will be virtually unlimited. It's the more you learn, the faster you'll make it. And if you're really good, you'll be able to even make money by not even investing a single dollar, because of how intelligent and how wise your decision-making skills are. Investing in your knowledge would be the most crucial thing to do out of all these steps. I would probably say that this one's the most important. Step number 17, I kind of brushed up on this one earlier. Just understand that good karma is really important. Whatever you offer knowledge-wise to the world, you get that back. Whatever you offer financially, you get that back. If you're more charitable, people will be charitable to you. If you treat people kind, they'll treat you kind. So whatever you offer to the world, you'll get that paid back, plus interest. Do good deeds, help people out. If you want to be smarter, offer your intelligence to people, and you'll gain more wisdom. You'll be much more successful if you practice this step. So this one is another and very important one. And just keep in mind that you don't have to invest a lot. You don't have to give your entire investment in order to get back. It just has to be an amount, but any amount will pay back. That basically covers what I wanted to talk about. So it's approximately 17 steps. Over time, I might add more steps or reduce it or modify it. Just keep in mind that I'm learning just as much as you're going to learn. Leave a comment in the comment section if you have anything that you can share or offer advice-wise. I'd be happy to read it. There's a reason why my channel is called The Determined Student, because I am not a teacher. I am just simply another student that is very eager to learn and very eager to show what I've learned to others. I think for as long as I continue to live, I'm always going to be a student. I don't really see myself as a teacher, even though I like teaching. But I always enjoy learning even more. It is a lot that I covered through all these steps. The very key thing in implementing each one is just to be very patient. Just be patient to yourself. Be kind to yourself, because it's going to require a lot of bravery and a lot of diligence to be able to implement all this. And since it's going to require to form new routines and habits, and I know from first-hand experience it is not something that is easily done. It requires a lot of effort and a lot of perseverance. But just understand that these steps are going to be pretty difficult, but if you can get through it, you will do very well later on in life, and you'll be able to retire to a more secure future. You won't have to rely on Social Security or on anyone else. You can just rely on your business and on yourself. Because when we follow all these steps, essentially you'll be minding your own business and building your business through all the investments you make. Through your business, you'll be doing very well financially. Those are my final thoughts. Just be patient and kind to yourself. I have to remind myself that all the time. Sometimes I get too hard on myself, saying, why have I not got anywhere financially yet? It's going to take a long time. This whole process is going to take time. It's going to take many, many years until you see very strong results, because you have to build it, and it's just going to grow slowly over time. Eventually you will get there as long as you don't give up on yourself. But as stated before, I'm going to cover more into detail what we should do in each step. And I'm going to be practicing this along with you as well. So we're going to learn together. So any recommendations that you have for me or any advice, again, you can leave it in the comment section. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, because that would let me know that I did a good job in my regard, and that it's going to show in the algorithm on YouTube and recommend this video to others. And hopefully we can try to reach as many people as we can. Thank you so much for sticking to the end, and I will see you guys soon. All right. Take care.